It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, hello there. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. And once again, we've got a lot of stuff today, and part of it's because sometimes when an idea pops in my head, I record a little segment, and then I have to mix them together later. And the longer the gap between the shows, the more little bits I have to put in the show. And so today we're going to go over double E and also I bonds from the U.S. Treasury, personal bonds that you can buy from the government and return them from the government. There's no market for them, and their pros and cons and how they work. And thank you for the listeners that gave me those ideas to cover that as well, because we've been doing several weeks now on bonds, and more bonds. So a couple more bonds. Also in the show, I have a very short 6-minute, I think, update on Schwab's purchase of TD Ameritrade. TD Ameritrade is the qualified custodian that I use for my clients, and so a little update there, so I don't have to tell 200 people. It's all in the show. And also for our interview, absolutely delighted to have Shannon Q on. She has her own podcast, our YouTube show. She is on the Atheist Experience out of Austin, Texas, every once in a while, and knows a lot about how the brain works. And we talk about that a little bit, but we just kind of talk about some fun stuff about the world. I think you'll enjoy it. So that'll be great. And I did forget to mention one other segment before we get to the interview. Will be about a portfolio rebalancing, I guess, or how to adjust a portfolio, or how to take money out, or how to add money in, just as another example. I've done a few of these in the past, and people seem to like them. So if you like it, let me know. If you hate it and you consider it a waste of your time to listen to it, you can let me know that also, and I might do them less often. I think it's kind of a practical walkthrough, because with interest rates really low, 1.5%, 2%, and even stock yields 1.5% to 2%, if you want to take out 4 or 5% from your portfolio every year, it can't just be from the dividends. It's just not an option. Well, it's not a good option, because if you get bond funds that pay 5, 6, 7% interest, somehow, somewhere in there, you're taking on a whole lot of risk. So anyway, we're going to go over a sample adjustment to a portfolio. And opening comments. Back in November, December, January, was trying to refinance my house because interest rates are really low. And you should check into that yourself. I've locked in a 30-year at 3%, which is cray-cray. But the funny thing is, when I was working on that 5-6 months ago, we eventually hit a roadblock, because the underwriter would not accept anything that I would give them as evidence that my business was still ongoing and active, despite the ability to show them my tax bills and all kinds of other things. Well, my local bank didn't seem to have any problems with how I run my business, and it was quite easy. So refinancing the house, and that will get rid of the PMI, which I took on the PMI intentionally, because I only put down 10% on roughly $300,000 house, because then that other $30,000, which I could have put down for a 20% deposit, that $30,000 has been invested for the last 4 years. And using the S&P 500 as a guesstimate, calendar year 2020, it made 18%. The year before that, it made 31%. The year before that, I think it may have lost 1 or 2%. And the year before that, it made money. So that $30,000 has created a crazy amount of money, maybe $15,000, $18,000. I haven't done the exact math because it's not really important. But so that money was working for me, and the price I had to pay was $60 a month. So that is about $750 a year times 4 years. So I'm out I'm out $300,000 to not put that money down on the house because I have to pay the PMI penalty. So I was out $3,000, but the money invested made close to $15,000 conservatively. And it doesn't always work out like this, because you could try this and the market could go down in the 3 or 4 years until you refinance your house, assuming that interest rates are low and that your house went up in value. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but if you do it over your entire lifetime, it's a process. It's something that you do, not something that you try. There is no try. There is only do. If you do this on an ongoing basis, every time you buy a house, every time you buy a car, if you can get painfully low, delightfully low, I guess delightfully low for the lender, delightfully low interest rates, I will borrow money at 3 or 4% as much as someone will let me do it, and then invest it in the stock market and theoretically make 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, or in this case more percent. But if you try it for a year or two, it might not work. So you have to be able to pay your mortgage. You have to have cash flow sufficient to cover in case it doesn't work out in the short term. But in the long run, clearly 10% return is bigger than a 3% interest rate. So it works out really good. So the PMI is going to go away. And because I've been making payments, and part of that payment includes principal, the loan total loan amount goes down. And the most fascinating thing is that not only does your loan payment go down, at least for a house, when the interest rate goes down, the amount of money that you send every month, the amount that goes to your principal, increases. So the $63 PMI went away. My payment's going to be about $100 less a month. And the principal that I'm paying every month, which of course I will get at some point when I sell the house, that is actually building wealth as well. It worked out something like $260, $270 a month. I am going to be ahead. Now, there's $1,500, $2,000 in bullshittery and fees that I have to pay to do a refinance. So I'm at $2,000, but if I can make $275, I'll call it $250 to make the math easy. $250 in 7-8 months, I'm broke even. If I stay here for 5 years, I will pocket that extra $250 per month for 5 years. And so in a given year, that would be $2,500, almost $3,000 for 5 years is $15,000. So I had to come up with $1,500 to $2,000 to start to refinance the house. But over the next 5 years, I'm going to make $15,000 extra in wealth because of the lower payments and no longer paying PMI and putting more principal towards the house because the interest rates went down. So all these little things, if you have sufficient means, if you are just like poor, and you can barely afford your rent, or worse than that, this is not going to help you so much. That there's other podcasts for that. But if you are making enough to pay your bills and you want to be saving money, these are ways that you can actually kind of create wealth out of the air. You're paying less money in interest. You're paying less money in penalties and fees and expense ratios. And if you try to look at everything that you can do in your life that is involving with money, it can have a really big impact over time. So anyway, just some fun thoughts to think about the home refinancing, and we'll take a quick break, go into a couple, three relatively short segments on investing, and then our interview with Shannon Q. So don't go anywhere. Don't change that dial. We'll be right back.
My mum only lied to me about one thing. She said there was a God, and But that's because when you're a working class mum, Jesus is like an unpaid babysitter. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, she wants you to be good. You know, the best working class mum where I grew up she wasn't hoping I'd be a doctor or a lawyer. She hoped I wouldn't be stabbed to death in a barroom fight, you know. So the best thing to do is, well, if he's God-fearing, then he'll be good. It's a good rule of thumb because, you know, I went to Sunday school from about the age of 4 till 8. There was just great teachings of Jesus. I love Jesus. He was my superhero. He really was. God was magic, right? But Jesus was just a man. And what I loved about Jesus was he was kind. And he was brave, and I thought he was amazing. And I thought he was brilliant, right? Just a brilliant guy, you know. So I was about 8, and my brother must have been 19. He came in once, and I was doing something from the Bible, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, drawing Jesus." And he went, "Who was Jesus?" And I said, "Well, he was the Son of God." He went, "Why do you believe in God?" Right? And my mum went, "Bob, shut up." And I knew she had something to hide. And he was telling the truth. And I knew from body language. And then I worked it out, and I was an atheist in an hour.
In an hour?
Yeah.
This Investing Skeptically segment is on savings bonds. I've talked about a lot of bonds lately because of the phenomenal low rates, interest rates, and the possible risk for aggressive bonds, junk bonds, and or long-term bonds if interest rates go up. Well, today I'm going to add to that a little bit more, and it's because this podcast, I enjoy some of the smartest listeners of any podcast out there, and they are very quick and efficient to let me know if I made an error, and I do that regularly, so I'm okay correcting those because the whole point is that we go forward and learn more together. This case, they pointed out some things that I did not discuss in the bond category that actually seem like a very reasonable things to discuss. So I'm going to talk about double E bonds, EE bonds, or I bonds, two different categories there. The first one is double E bonds, and this might be the bonds that your parents or grandparents bought for you a long time ago. They pay very minimal interest rates, but one of the nice things about it is unless the U.S. government defaults, you're going to get what you were promised. It's going to happen. So really no risk, and you can do that with other short-term bonds through bond funds. But the double E bonds are not traded. They're bought by you or someone on your behalf, or you buy them on someone else's behalf, and you buy them from the government directly, and then you tender them, you return them, you collect on your earnings back from the government. And the double E bonds usually will have, oh gosh, I think it's either I think it's 20 year till maturity. So for example, if you buy a face value $10,000 bond, you only pay $5,000, and 20 years from now you'll get $10,000 back. And that rate of return, I think I worked it out, is something give or take 4% a year, which for bonds is very nice, but the problem is that it's 20 years. So if you want something very safe and very secure, and it's going to give you a reasonable amount of return of give or take 4%, a double E bond might be an okay thing for you to buy. If you get the paper version, you have to make sure you don't lose it. You can always go and file by your Social Security number, and the government, I think, will do research and find what is assigned to that Social Security number. These are all by Social Security number, but it can be a lot of extra work. And again, for 4%, often throughout history, at least the modern 40, 50 years of history, you can generally get bonds that pay 4% somewhere else, even from the government short-term bonds. You just can't do it today. So today, short-term bonds are 0.5%, maybe 1% now, because rates may have ticked up just a teeny bit. So you could make 1%, or you could make this 4%. The big problem with the double E bonds is that they only give you that doubling effect at full maturity 20 years from now. And in the meantime, they will pay a different and variable and adjusted rate. I believe it's adjusted twice a year. And right now, that amount of interest, again, I think is under 0.5% or 0.5% or something like that. So if you own the bonds for 18 years and you need the money, you're not going to get the 4% per year that you thought you were going to get. You're going to get something close to 0.5% or 1 or maybe 2 or 3% if interest rates go up over the next decade. So it's kind of a pain. I mean, unless you buy bigger ones, because you've got to usually take them to the bank. Maybe the bank will help you log all the serial numbers with the government, and then they're actually physically sent to the government and they're redeemed and the money shows up in your bank account. So it's kind of cumbersome. It's kind of awkward, but 4%. How I use bonds is for the cushion. And again, generally, I don't use a whole lot of bonds, maybe 5 or 10%. I mean, if you're really conservative, but you've still got a long time to go to retirement, we can talk about a higher percentage of bonds. But for most people seeking long-term growth, 14, 15 or more years away from retirement, you're gonna probably want all stocks anyway. And if you do have some bonds and or maybe you're hedging against a future market drop, which I generally don't like, again, the double E bonds won't work because they're going to pay you next to nothing. If you're going to get next to nothing, you could use a CD or you could buy a short-term bond fund and not have to deal with the hassle. And so for most people, if you're all in stocks, it doesn't matter. If you're building the cushion, you might be able to use double E, but again, you have to wait 20 full years. So the idea that they're available to you to pull out when the stock market goes down, you might lose all the potential theoretical gains you thought you were going to have. So if you want to use them, that's okay, but it's not still an easy, great answer. Another reason why I probably didn't think of these is because I can't really help you. There's not a mutual fund that you can go and hold double E bonds. You have to get them directly from the government. And the website for that is treasurydirect.gov. So you can go get them yourself and you can deal with turning them in yourselves. I've had clients over the years where they'll show up and they have a stack of double E bonds that maybe their parents bought for them. And of course, the problem is if they're 17 years old, you could get close to nothing as far as an interest rate, so you have to wait 3 more years. And of course, the other problem I have is where someone finds these things or their parents bought them for them and they never knew about it. And then one or both of the parents has passed away and they become your possession and they're older than 20 years. And so depending on the exact year that they're issued, what happens is after it doubles for its face value, it goes back to giving you an adjustable, incredibly low interest rate. So if you had it for 30 years, again, you may have made 4% for the first 20 years, but then only 1% for the next 10 years after that. So double E's, nothing wrong with them. They're just inconvenient. There's not a fund that you can buy. It creates a little bit of extra work. So that's some thoughts about the double E. The other type is the Series I. Oh, and by the way, both of these bonds, double E and the I bonds, have pretty material restrictions on the quantity that you can buy. I think the double E's, you might even be able to get $25,000 a year if you do it electronically. The I bonds, I believe the number is $10,000 in a year, and maybe an extra $5,000 if you use part of your tax refund and you instruct the government to buy I bonds for you. I bonds are a little nicer in that the I is for inflation. And so if you're particularly worried about inflation, this is the single best hedge, straight up hedge against inflation that you can get, period. Now, maybe I have an argument with myself because stocks do a really good job, because stocks are the one thing that beats out inflation when inflation is at reasonable levels, 3, 5, 8%, which we haven't seen for a long time, thankfully. But if interest rates got higher than that, the I savings bonds, the Series I savings bonds, they will match all of that. So if inflation is 15%, they're likely to give you about a 15% return for that year. So as a straight up pure play protection against inflation, the Series I bond is a good way to go. Again, I can't help you buy them. You can't have it as your part of your portfolio. You have to do treasurydirect.gov. You buy them from the government. You sell them back to the government to collect your interest. And it is made up of two components. And one component is, I think they call it the base. And then you have the incremental amount that you get as the inflation adjustment. One of the problems, and I think this is the number right now, and this is adjusted, I believe, twice a year. Let's see here. Fixed rate stays the same for the life of the bond that you buy, and the inflation rate is adjusted twice per year. I'm reading off Treasury Direct right now. The current combined rate is 3.54%, which actually is pretty juicy, honestly, for a very, very safe bond. Again, you can only buy $10,000 per year per Social Security number. So if you're in a couple, there's two of you, you can do $20,000. You could do $20,000 worth in 2021, and then 6 months from now do 2022 and do another 20. So you could have $40,000 in this, which might not actually be a horrible thing. Again, it's something I can't help you with. If you are a client of mine and you want to do this, that'd be perfectly fine. Just let me know so I can adjust the plan that we have to show that you have more money in bonds than what I can see in your account at TD Ameritrade. The base rate is 0 right now. So what that means is that as long as you own these bonds, these I bonds, as long as you own them, you're going to get 0 return plus a number for the inflation factor. If inflation becomes really low, say 0.5% or 1%, you could end up with 0.5% or 1% on the Series I bonds. So they will help you perfectly, or as close as anything I can think of, hedge against inflation, dollar for dollar, percent for percent. But you'll never achieve anything greater than inflation. At least not if you buy an I bond now, because the base rate is 0%. There have been times in the past where I bonds have had several percentage points and then in the inflation adjustment. Much sexier during that kind of time, because if you had one that paid 3% and now you're getting 3.5% for inflation, you could be making 6.5% on a bond that you bought years ago. So that's probably, if you're wanting to hedge against inflation, the two things that I like. One is just straight up the stock market. The biggest winner, clearly, but the most precisely aligned with inflation. The almost dollar for dollar, percent for percent protection against inflation is the Series I savings bonds. You can buy them at treasurydirect.gov. And I think you can start with as little as $25, kind of what's the point. But, those are a couple of bonds that I didn't mention before. So thank you to the listeners. They know who they are that suggested these topics. And I hope that helps some of you. Maybe someone can benefit particularly from the Series I bonds as a small part of your portfolio. If everything else goes down in a given year and inflation is high, this might have been the fantasy place for you to be. I don't know what the future will hold, but Series I bonds, I'll give them thumbs up. Something you can go get on your own.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
A few weeks ago, I kind of did a sample walkthrough of how I look at someone's account and adjust it. And as I've mentioned, I think in the last show or two, I did receive a lot of very cool and positive emails about people liking that I walked through that. So I'm going to do another one. And of course, if you hate this, let me know, hopefully in a nice way. If you enjoy this and this is beneficial and helpful to you, at least just kind of for the thought process, let me know. And this is an example of why I part of me wants to expand the business because there's just that I can always grow, I can always make more money, I can always do things. And one of the ways to be able to do that would be to automate things. And there's lots of companies that do that. Of course, they charge less because it's automated, but maybe I could do that. But this is an example of why that may not work for me. And maybe that's something that clients really like, and maybe this is helpful. So I'm just babbling, just some thoughts. So this is a couple that is in retirement, and luckily for them, they have pretty good cash flow, and they don't need cash yet from any of these accounts, but we have had discussions about starting to do that. The other thing is that as we've been discussing the options of pulling money out, which in and of itself is its own complicated segment, because people always will ask me, well, do I start with the IRA or the Roth or the joint tenants account? Well, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. One of the weird things about doing this is that in this situation, they have 5 accounts, 2 IRAs, 2 Roth IRAs, and 1 joint tenants account. And the investments in each account are different. And this is something that is, not like a program would do. A program would probably take each account and whatever the proper mix for you is, it would put you in that mix in this case, all 5 of those accounts. And so all 5 accounts would be equal as far as the percentages and the weightings. And that may not be good for you. It may create more investments that are in the taxable account that pay dividends, and therefore you have a higher tax bill. So in this case, in the joint tenants account, we have no bonds at all because we don't want those bond dividends to be taxed, at least not now. Because in the IRAs, they will be taxed. In the Roths, they won't ever be taxed. So I don't know. This is just like a lot of little that goes through my head. So, but of course, they want to start taking some money out. And so the question is, where does it come from? That's the first thing that I'm thinking about. And in their joint tenants account, I ended up not really being able to do much adjusting, or I chose not to do much adjusting. So, and here's why. They happen to have some big index funds, like an S&P 500 fund and a total stock market fund, which when you have a $1.5 million portfolio, I don't use those funds if I can avoid it. I want the 6 different U.S. market segments so I can adjust and balance them. However, they've held these positions for quite a long time, so the gains are pretty freaking big. And at any point in time, if they start taking money out of those stock positions, depending on their income level or depending on your income level, you're going to create capital gains. If your total income for the year is low enough, the capital gains tax rate that you pay might be 0%. It might be 15%. It might be 20%, and it could even be 23.8% because there's this extra thing that technically is not considered a capital gains tax, but an additional tax because you made too much money and then took capital gains. And go talk to your tax expert about that. So we want to be careful with taking money out of anything because we're going to have to pay tax on something, but not the Roths, because right now the law is there's no tax on that. So the question then becomes, well, where do we take the money from? And we haven't decided that yet. We still have to have conversations on that. Now, if their income is relatively low enough, taking money out of the joint tenants account and paying 15% tax on the gains might be the way to go. And if you put in $50,000 and it's now worth $250,000, if you sold all of that, of course, you'd have $200,000 in gains because you don't pay tax on what you put in originally because that money was already taxed. So there's that. And so we don't move those positions, but those positions kind of create a blockage, an obstruction in my system. But thankfully, in this case, they have alternate accounts, IRAs and Roth IRAs. So I can go in those other accounts and adjust, rebalance large cap growth, large cap value, mid cap, small cap growth and value, those 4 other funds. And I can leave these S&P 500 and total stock market funds alone. And they just keep growing. Any dividends that are paid in that year, of course, are taxed, but the growth, the appreciation, is not taxed. And this is fantastic because this is almost as good as having an IRA. The nice thing about the taxable account is that, like I said, the dividends you pay tax on, but the appreciation just keeps building and compounding year after year after year without tax, even inside of a taxable account, if the funds don't thrash around and fuck around by buying and selling all kinds of shit all year long. And that's one of the magical properties of index funds, is that while they do beat most of managed funds, that's before you even consider the tax implications, which makes them even betterer. So one of the options we have going forward as far as this concept of taking out cash, money out every month, and of course, with a $1.5 million portfolio, if we use the 5% rule, you're talking about 50,000 plus 25, 75,000. That's what, 6,000 a month? Because that'd be 72 grand. They could take out 6 grand a month, and they've not been doing that. And it's a weird thing coming from a financial advisor. I'm bugging them to spend more money because I think there should be a better life balance. You've got all this money, use some of it. We're not going to go nutty and take out 400 grand, but maybe 6,000 a month, maybe 3,000 a month, maybe something. I don't know. If you can't figure out what to do with your money, then give it to some charity. That's always an option, right? Now, if your goal is to have it grow, and you want to live on a minimalist lifestyle and leave as much money as you want to your kids or nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters, fine, whatever. It's your money. Do whatever you want to with it. Just knowing you have this big pile of money, even though you don't need it, might feel pretty fucking cool, I could imagine. So in an up year, or a couple of up years where the U.S. stock market in particular has done fantastic, taking money from the joint tenants account, again, depending on your income and your tax tiers, might be a really good place to take money out of. Now, the funny thing is that once you start taking money out of one of the accounts, you could always fucking stop and switch to something else. So in this case, the joint tenants account is mostly those big stock index funds. We take money out of there. We pay capital gains. Everything's cool. If the market suddenly drops 50%, we stop taking money out of all the stocks that just went down epically, right? We'd stop doing that. And then we can switch now to an IRA or a Roth IRA and take money out of there depending on what is in there and what our goals and desires and tax consequences are. So it's nice to have all of these choices. So that's a conversation that you can have with me, a much longer conversation if you're a client. If you're not a client and you just have questions, we can talk about it and I can give you some ideas like I just did here. Now, the next thing is rebalancing. Often people ask me, how often do you rebalance? I don't know, whatever. If it's, a couple $100 grand, 2 or 3 or 400,000, once a year is probably gonna be just fine almost all of the time. And so you can go forward kind of with that idea in your head. When it gets to be $1 million, look at it once each quarter. And if it's off by a couple percent, whatever. You don't want to make this into a ton of work. But if there's a really big swing in the market like March of 2020, when the market fell 30, 40% in a couple of weeks, then, that might call special attention. You could look at what you've got and readjust. Maybe you don't. It would have been fine either way if you adjusted or didn't adjust. In this case, it might have made you money because the things that fell at different rates. And then when they recovered at different rates. But you don't know that until afterwards. So, the hindsight is very helpful. So you don't have to even do that. But, maybe if you're over $1 million. And one of the things I talked about, and I got a lot of really good response on a segment a few shows ago called How to Unfuck Your Portfolio. The really big thing that I provide, that I do, that I have, is I have this massive spreadsheet and I make a plan. In this couple, we have a plan. How much is supposed to be in every one of these categories? And we can see down to the nearest dollar, if I pull the data from that day, how much is really in every single fund that they own and how that relates to what the plan was. If the plan gets tweaked, we can see what it is. We can do the adjustments and track them there. You can see what percentage of your portfolio, or what dollar amount is in every single individual position. And because I use these index funds that have limited overlaps, with some exceptions, of course, you have that clarity to see what you own. And of course, the other buzzword I like is the granularity. So we can go and sell one type of asset. If you have a target date fund in retirement, it does all the balancing for you, which is cool. But if you need money out, then you just take money out and you get the net result of all the investments in there. Here we can pick and choose from which things we want. But as far as rebalancing for this client, what I've done is I've fully implemented the international rebalancing that I had described earlier in 2021. And so thankfully, a bulk of their international stock investments were in the IRAs or Roth IRAs. So I could sell those and rebalance the international position as was discussed on my show several months ago. I hadn't done it for this client yet because we were still in those discussions about where is the money going to come from. And I was waiting on that. And right now we're kind of in a holding pattern because they don't really need any of the money. So I've now gone ahead and done that international adjustment. So that's one thing that I did. Another thing that I did is that I have removed about 2.5% of their total portfolio from the U.S. stock market. 1.5% of that went to the cushion and 1% of that went to international. So I don't know if this is a really good way to think about it, but like a balloon animal, you got a little cute balloon doggy and it's got 4 little legs. Well, you squeeze the air out of you squish one of the legs and it gets smaller and that air goes into the other legs. And that's kind of what I'm doing. Although in my head, maybe that one doggy leg was swollen because it did too well. I don't know, the analogy breaks down, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. So I look at the portions that are in the U.S. stock market, particularly the things that I can adjust without creating taxes. So not the taxable account. What can I trim back a little bit? And I look at the things that maybe are over the weightings that they should be based on the plan that we created many years ago. And so I'll take some of the money out of that. And some of that money goes into bonds and some of that money goes into international. So while I'm doing all of this, it's kind of, a lot of pieces all moving at once. So I have a spreadsheet that I try and rechange and adjust all of my adjustments before I even make the first trade, because I want to know where I am, which is easy because I pull that data, and then where I'm going to be after I do all of the adjustments. And so in this case, like I said, the end result was 2.5% less in the U.S. stock market because it's done so well. It's not that I'm particularly worried that it's going to go down, but you want to sell from things that go up. I mean, everybody knows the idea of buy low and sell high. Well, here we're not adding money or taking out any money. So how does one buy low and sell high? And with this systemic approach of all these different index funds that have very little overlap, you can look and see what has done well compared to my plan. What is now too big? And one of the things in this very specific client, specific case, the one thing that has done very well in the last year or two is the Vanguard Small Cap Value Index Fund. It's actually, now this is cherry picking, so you're warned in advance. From the dip of March of last year till today, that fund is up almost 100%, or around maybe even more than 100%. But that's from the market bottom. And so it fell a whole bunch. And it's a funny math thing because, just as an example, if you have 100,000 in a fund that falls by half, that 100,000 turns into 50,000. If that fully recovers back to where it was before, you went up 100%. But during that entire time frame, your net change could be zero. So that's why picking and choosing dates allows for someone to create a story like I just did. You can pick and choose your dates and make the data say what you want it to say. So look out for that. But they had done really well in that, and it got to be just a little bit more than where we wanted to be. I also did a slight reduction in the mid-cap growth fund and added some of that to the mid-cap value fund. So I'm just looking at all these different things and trying to figure out where to adjust to. But in this case, I added one more bond fund because we didn't have anything in the total international bond fund that I use. Rebalanced U.S. stocks while pulling out 2.5% of the portfolio from that section. 2.5%. These are the adjustments that I do. It's not selling this one thing 100% and buying this one other thing. I'm not doing that kind of day trading, market timing stuff. These are slow, gradual retirement adjustments, increasing the cushion. The U.S. did great, so I pull from there. I add a little to international, which I diversified and rebalanced into new funds. And I think I'm now just repeating myself. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into my thought process and how that works. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have questions or want to discuss this or something about your portfolio, you can send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Of course, in the first email, do not send any really detailed information like your social security number or attach statements with your account numbers on them. But do include your email, please. I'll have your email, but please include your phone number so that I can call you. We can either talk when I call or we can set up a time to talk later. But that wraps up this segment. I don't know what to call it, but Phil makes an adjustment to an account portfolio. I don't know. So hopefully that helps out. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. I just wanted to take a minute or two to give you a quick Schwab update. As you may know, Schwab has purchased TD Ameritrade, and so far they've been giving pretty good information, and it looks like the official crossover for at least people that are TD Ameritrade institutional clients, which would be every one of my clients. If your funds are being custodianed by, I think that's how you say it, TD Ameritrade Institutional, TD Ameritrade, virtually anyone who is one of my clients is going to have their money there. They expect the date that will all switch from TD Ameritrade being the custodian to Schwab being the custodian is likely going to be between March and October of 2023. Yes, that's right. 2 full years from now, June of 2021. So there's not a whole lot to worry about. Not a whole lot is changing. They are keeping several features that TD Ameritrade has developed over the years, and they will incorporate those into Schwab. One of them is called think tanks. It's just a way to evaluate stocks. Not something I use, and to the best of my knowledge, not something any of my clients use. And there's a couple other things. TD Ameritrade created this kind of cool tool. It just didn't apply for me, called iRebal. And with iRebal, an advisor could, someone like me, could create a handful or a couple handfuls of portfolios. And then when you become a client, they could say, you get portfolio number 5 and you get number 6, or you get number 14, whatever they want to do. It's a very common industry practice. The problem I have is that it can miss nuances in individual clients' accounts, in their personal situations. And if you have it set to automatically rebalance, the rebalancing will be perfect and on time, which probably would make some of my clients happier, just a little bit. But it can also create problems and create tax consequences if something is not set right or done right, or the automatic rebalancing happens to positions that you have in a taxable account. So one of the things I like to do is handle all of that personally, client by client by client, which is part of why I get so very busy sometimes, because I want to make multiple changes for multiple clients and multiple accounts. So I don't use iRebalance. It's kind of like heading towards, one of those automated funds that you could go use somewhere else. And I kind of feel like, what's the point of paying Phil for that part of the service if I'm not doing that part of the service? So for me, it's much more personal and time consuming to rebuild your portfolio, compare it to the plan, revise the plan, talk to you about it. A lot of listeners will know, especially if they have larger accounts with money in taxable accounts, that I will almost always call before I do anything that creates a tax bill. And usually I'll ask that person to send me an email saying they understand what we discussed, so that I have a record for myself, because most people don't like getting a sudden surprise $10,000 or $20,000 in extra taxes. Of course, you have to have a pretty large account for something like that to happen. But those are some changes that I know of that will affect virtually no one that is a client. But it's new information. I wanted to let you know. The one other thing, and again, this is probably going to affect none of my clients, but one thing that they are changing sooner rather than later, and you will get an email, or not an email, well, you could email or a letter, depending on the settings of your own account at TD Ameritrade, on or after June 30th of 2021, TD Ameritrade is going to change what they call the excess bank for insured deposit accounts. I think the only thing that would affect any of my clients, and I'm hard pressed to think of anyone that uses this, is that if you have a CD, a certificate of deposit at TD Ameritrade Bank, that will be switching to Schwab Bank. So there may be little things that you'll notice from time to time, like you might get a letter from Schwab welcoming you to Schwab. It's all good. That's a plan. They're just kind of trying to ease everybody in. There's still 2 more years before advisors and advisor clients will see material changes, like everything being custodianed at TD Ameritrade one day and Schwab the next day. That's probably 2 years away from now. So if you have questions, you can specifically call and ask me. You can call the 1-800 number on the TD Ameritrade webpage when you log into your accounts, and I'll answer everything I can. If I can't answer it, which might be a lot of stuff, I can call some of my contacts in TD Ameritrade and or Schwab if that becomes a point of contention where at some point my contact is not a TD Ameritrade employee but gets moved over to be a Schwab employee. I'll try to find out anything I can for you and get back to you. So that's a little quick update on the Schwab purchase of TD Ameritrade and when dates might take effect. And this information is relevant for June of 2021.
I think there'd be more atheists and less faithful if you weren't allowed to teach anything, you weren't allowed to mention any gods or any beliefs or atheism, right, until they were 20. I think we'd see a different pattern. The human brain when it's young, is a sponge. It has to be. It has to take in all the information. It has to trust its parents, its elders, to survive. Without question, don't touch the fire. Why not? Don't go near don't go near the wolf. Don't touch that spider with a red bit. Don't touch that. Why not? Just don't. There is a God. What? There is a God. And if you're bad, you go to hell. Okay? And if that's constantly confirmed, like all the other things, wolves eat you, black widows kill you, fires burn you, if it's given that same level of credence and truth, you're never going to get over it. It's going to be a lot harder to undo that. I think the myths came up, maybe, often as a stopgap to knowledge until we find out more. The Earth is flat, and no, we've proved now. Okay, the Earth's not flat, we were wrong. Okay, but that's not personal. You don't take that personally. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your afterlife. And so they often want to hold on to that, right? But only because of the way they've been conditioned. We know it's fun to tell children there's a Santa Claus, and there's fairies at the bottom of the garden, and all these cute things. It's cute till they're 7 or 8. If they're 34, it's a bit embarrassing socially. This is my son. What's he doing? He's looking for fairies. Is he? Okay, we better leave. If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. If you're born in Pakistan, you're probably a Muslim. That's a coincidence, isn't it? That you're always born into the right God. Always. Isn't that lucky? I was born under the right God. All those others are going to hell. But I was born into the right religion. I'm going to heaven. It's strange that we hold on to these sort of medieval beliefs. Where did the universe come from? God made it. Which doesn't solve the problem for me. Because we straight away say, well, who made God? And if they say, well, he's always been around, well, let's just say the universe has then. Let's just cut out the middleman. It saves time.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, everybody, it's time for the weekly guest. No, I guess I don't really do this weekly like I should. The occasional guest? No, this show's guest. We're going to go with that today. This show's guest is Shannon Q. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's not a problem. So we agreed in advance that you were just going to talk for 30 minutes. Go.
Okay, all right. So here's the thing. I have nothing to say. Nothing of value. I could just start riddling off like brain facts if you want. That's if I could just fill 30 minutes with just information about neuroscience.
You could pretend that I said that current modern day brain science proves God exists.
Oh, well, that would fill significantly more time than we have, I think. If that's what you want to start our discussion on.
Well, before we get into deep, fun stuff, give me a little bit about your background and for my listeners so they know who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Shannon Q. I have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q. I'm also one of the co-hosts of the Atheist Experience on YouTube. And I co-host another show called The Line. The latter two that I mentioned are call-in shows where people call in to discuss belief. On my individual channel, on Shannon Q, I talk about the intersection of psychology and faith. And I have a background in psychology. I have a degree in psychology. And I studied perceptual cognition, communication theory, neuroscience. So I spend a good chunk of time talking about things that are related to that, as well as being a mental health advocate and engaging in discussions pertaining to faith and philosophy and psychology and science in general. So that's kind of what I do. I guess that's relevant here.
Sure. And of course, since you mentioned them, the Atheist Experience is a product of the atheist community of Austin, and The Line is a whole different thing, right? It's not linked to ACA?
Yeah, no, they're not affiliated. There's some crossover with some hosts. Like, so for example, Matt Delahunty hosts the show on The Line as well. as do I, and some other ACA hosts come and guest. But it's similar in principle in that we take calls on those shows, but they're not just calls about religion. We also take calls about politics, about social justice, about a whole myriad things over on the line. It's a little bit wider in breadth when it comes to the subject matter that we're taking calls in regards to.
And we might as well disclose that you're a foreigner, because you keep saying about a little funky. So you're not in you're not in Midwest United States, are you?
No, I'm Canadian, and I'll try not to drop too hard into the accent. But I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm from Nova Scotia, Canada. Yeah.
Now I'm sure that 90+% of my listeners know where Nova Scotia is. But if some regular human being that's not a regular show listener comes across, where is Nova Scotia?
We're on the Atlantic Ocean. We're a peninsula. We're right kind of adjacent to the state of Maine, kind of stuck out in the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah.
Have you ever been to Bahaba, Maine?
No, I've actually never been to Maine. Can you believe that? I've never been to Maine. The first time I ever went to the United States, period, full stop, was to go to Faithless Forum and visit the ACA in 2019. That's the first time I ever left Canada.
Well, if you ever get near, I'm pretty sure it's Bahaba, and they have Bar Island, where at low tide, you can walk from the mainland to the island.
Oh, very cool. It's like here in Nova Scotia, we have the highest tides in the world. We have in the Bay of Fundy.
Yes.
It's great. It's great. There's
Isn't
a
it
place
like
near where I live
50, 60 feet?
Burncoat Head, where you can just walk to islands when the tide is out. And when the tide comes in, you can ride the tidal board on rafts. It's pretty cool. I've done them both.
Oh, that is a reason to go there. Just, I want to go into the Arctic Circle, the highest tidal variance in the world. Is it like 50 or 60 feet? It's some crazy amount of number?
I would absolutely just be making it up if I affirmed anything that you just said. I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that it's the highest tides in the world in the Bay of Fundy.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you.
I've seen the pictures, and it's pretty freaking dramatic. So that's kind of cool. For me, that would be
I've ridden them coming in. That's the coolest. When you ride the tidal board coming in, you get on a whitewater raft and you wait for the tide to come because it rushes in too. It comes in so quick. It's pretty cool.
Oh my God, that sounds scary as fuck. Like a lot of fun though.
It's awesome.
I usually try to avoid surrounding myself with materials that can suffocate me.
Oh, well, maybe you shouldn't come to Nova Scotia then.
Yeah.
Definitely don't come to ride the tidal board then, if that's the case.
Maybe. I was kind of curious before we get into some other stuff. Have you read the newer book by Jeff Hawkins, 1,000 Brains?
No, I've not. I'm currently reading The Hidden Spring by Mark Soms. That's my current read when it comes to neuroscience. I like reading books that pertain to theories regarding consciousness, and Mark Soms is a relatively new book out. He's a neuroscientist from South Africa. That's pretty cool. But I've actually not heard of that book. Is that one that you're currently reading?
It's a couple books ago.
Okay.
I think it came out months ago, so it's not old. Jeff Hawkins is one of the people or the person who created Palm Pilot, Palm Company.
Okay, I used to have one of those. I'm old.
Yeah. It was a thing that when it was really cool to have 60 buttons right below the teeny screen of your phone.
Right, exactly, yeah.
They were huge, and then they got bought by, I think, HP, Hewlett Packard, because they wanted to get into the phone business.
Oh, interesting.
And they fucked it all up, and that happens a lot in the business.
The story of BlackBerry all over again.
It is, but yeah, they bought Palm, and they were gonna do stuff, and it failed miserably. But he had money from that, and I think he actually helps out several secular organizations in the U.S. because he's U.S. based. Okay. And a thousand brains, and it talks about a lot of how does the brain?
How does the brain?
Yeah, because
I want to hear about it. What does he mean by how does the brain?
Yeah, and so I'm going to have it wrong, which is great because maybe my stupidity will key you in on something. But there's cortical columns. Is that right?
Cortical column.
Maybe I have it wrong. But the
Well,
entire surface of the brain, which is this big foldy thingy,
yes.
is covered in columns of brain cells. And
Yeah.
he's been doing research on how those columns perceive information and how they share information. And as an example, if someone loses their ability to feel the touch sensation with their left hand, the brain, I can't even do English. The brain may adjust at some point and they're able to feel again because...
Well, it's called plasticity. That's neuroplasticity.
Right,
yeah.
because all the different parts of the brain just kind of figure out, or because of the leads that come to them and the wires from other parts of the brain, which things they're supposed to interpret. And
it can be feedback related when it comes to perception too, especially if you have a history of perceptual abilities.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, if you say brain in front of me, you're making a mistake because I'll just start explaining. But when it comes to plasticity for something like tactile responses, so for example, if I touch my desk right now, there's a recognizable feeling, there's something that's familiar to me, that perception doesn't simply exist in one area of my brain. It's not like a one-to-one correspondence. First, it has to activate the nociceptors that are a form of neuroreceptors that are in my skin cells. And then those travel up the spinal column into the motor cortex and also through the brainstem. And people kind of underestimate the impact of the brainstem and the midbrain structures when it comes to things like perception, because every perception that you have isn't just you registering that you're touching something, it's you comparing that to the memory of every sensation that you've had prior so that you can create this sort of correspondence. Right.
Well, one of the topics he had specifically is the brain models things, like what it...
He's absolutely right.
So,
yes, that's what I'm trying to get to, yeah.
Yep, you mentioned memories, but it also models things and what they should be like, and when you then perceive that object through smell or touch or vision, it looks at it and says, okay, this is kind of like this is what I expect, and when it's not what was expected, that's the most interesting.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah, no, I completely agree, because when it's not what you're expecting, you're going to have a higher degree of activation signals.
Yeah,
when it's not what you're
and when
expecting.
something happens that you didn't expect, that's when the miracles happen, right?
It could be. Yeah, it could be. A lot of miracles, I think, in my mind, are just total misperceptions. Like, they're not even delusions. They're just misperceptions or faulty recall of perceptions, or primed recall of perceptions, or guided recall of perceptions. Because it's not even just when you're perceiving something, when you're recalling a perception or any experience, really. Just you recalling that memory has a distortive property on that memory, because you're pulling that memory out of your filing index, for lack of a better word. That's probably a very poor way to put it, but you're pulling that memory out of your filing index in the context at which you were that you decided you needed to recall it, and that sort of taints that perception to a certain degree. So it's not even just a model of one-to-one of what you're perceiving in real time. When it comes to miracles, you may have perceived something that is actually benign in real time, but through recall, through crowd conformity, through group dynamics, through priming, your recall of that memory contorts to the point that you fully believe that you've experienced something different than what you actually experienced at the time.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. That ties to me a little bit. I have, let's see, I want to be discreet enough. I know somebody that I help from time to time that has been diagnosed with very mild schizophrenia.
Okay.
And they have a very elaborate process of reinterpreting events that happen. Okay. And it's not always bad. Sometimes it's quite good. But when they tell me something, I have to stop and ask from a different angle, or ask what happened before or what happened after, to try to get to the core of the story and what caused it. Because when something happens, they will often embellish to a point that there's only a kernel of truth, but then they fully embrace that embellished story, which they clearly fabricated post hoc of the event. And to me, it's partially fascinating and infuriating, because I know in advance that a good part of the story, that's not what happened. But
Fair enough.
But they at least from their own internal perception, they're not lying about what happened, because they can't tell the difference between what really did happen a day or two later or ago versus what they're explaining now, because for whatever reason they've adopted this new story that they perceive as being truthful. So if you say that didn't happen that way, it's a giant roadblock in the conversation.
There's ways to have conversations without just solely negating that a person's relaying what they believe is their legitimate experience. Because if you say, hey, that didn't happen that way, from a person who really wholly believes that it did happen that way, like they're not lying to you, they're relating their experience as they recall it, even though it may be inaccurate. One way to approach people when something like that takes place is to ask them to recall more minute details.
Right.
And also recall emotional states in time. But it also very much depends on the person that you're interacting with. If the person you're interacting with has a mild form of schizophrenia, that's something that's super common to have those forms of embellishments. I hope that they're being monitored and medicated.
They are being monitored, and it's someone that I help. I just don't want to go into the details of the relationship because of their privacy. But for sure. It's a very fascinating thing, and it actually kind of in a way, because it's so frustrating, keeps me grounded to reality and a constant recognition of how hard it is to exist for a lot of people. And I know, because I listen to Atheist Experience every week, and you're on there from time to time, that sometimes when people call up, I don't think they're bad. I don't think they mean ill. They often have the general well-being of other people in mind, but how they approach reality is sometimes, quite frankly, concerning. I guess in the way they describe things, you're like, wow, how do we get to that place? And like you said, if you just go, no, that didn't happen, you're a liar. Well, okay, you're done. So you can't get to a greater truth because you just ruined it. But I know that's something that you have been very nimble at when talking to people on the show, where you try to get them to look at it a different way or re-explain it so that you can get to the essence of the truth of what they're trying to share.
That's one of my favorite things to do, is try to figure out how, if you and I are presented with the exact same stimuli set, how we can come to completely different conclusions about the perception that we just had, and what causes that, and where that differentiates. I find that stuff just generally fascinating, but when it comes to forming belief systems, it goes a degree higher than just personal and fascination and interest, to feeling as though it's imperative to address, because how we perceive the world, engage with the world, form cultures and communities, and what that means for how we shape the world around us is something that many of us sort of take for granted. We all just feel as though, everybody feels as though when they wake up in the morning that they have the right perspective on things.
Yeah. Most
people don't do a great job of fully scrutinizing why they have the perspectives they do, and it doesn't even dawn on many people. And also, I want to be right as well. So through this endeavor, I can also hold my own systems of belief up to scrutiny by comparing them one-to-one against somebody else who's got a completely different paradigm that they're operating within, to see which one of those two outcomes holds water and why, and understand why one of us may come to a just like dramatically, diametrically opposed conclusion to the other person. Because the more we understand, I think, how we come to these conclusions, why we come to these conclusions, and how we can better talk to each other about why that's the case and how that's the case, the better off we'll all be ultimately.
Yeah, it popped into my head, and I mean this as a joke, listeners, sarcastic perhaps, sardonic perhaps, but that explanation is why the four Gospels don't agree with each other, so therefore they just proved that Jesus is real, because if they agreed, that would be unbelievable.
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Why do you think that what I said in that explanation tracks with that?
Well, it's just the idea, like in a car accident, you have 6 witnesses and you interview the 6 witnesses, and there's going to be a lot of things that you would think would not vary that do. And it's just kind of I put a little psychotic twist on things that I've heard from apologists where they're like, well, you atheists would just, if everything in the 4 Gospels matched perfectly, you would say that they're just copying each other and therefore it's fake. The very fact that they disagree through human interpretations is a fact that it's true. And you're just like, no, that doesn't track that way, but okay.
No, and that's also not what I was intending. What I was intending is to try to figure out the why is the important component there.
Yeah.
Why we come to different conclusions is the important component, because I can test the epistemology that I'm using to come to the conclusions that I do against the epistemology that somebody who's an interlocutor who has definitely different conclusions than I do. I can test that epistemology kind of in real time with that person to see which one holds up to scrutiny. So it's not a matter of, well, you believe a thing and I believe a thing, and that's interesting because people believe different things.
Right.
So neat. It's it's more about the why of it that I think is the important component.
The we agree to disagree. Well, that's nice to stop a discussion or an argument, but it doesn't get us any closer to the truth.
Right. Why do we disagree?
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing on my show. It hasn't happened lately, and I'm not inviting anyone to do this specifically, but I do make mistakes on my show, even though I've been doing my job for 25 years. I make mistakes. There's things I don't know. There's things I've forgotten about. And my listeners are fantastic for letting me know when I've made an error. And from time to time, I'll come on and have to correct myself. And I've actually had people object, and they're bothered by the fact that I've corrected myself. Because one person was my favorite. They said that you are hurting your credibility as an expert by telling people you have things wrong.
Oh, that's a horrible take.
and my basic response to that was, then don't listen to the fucking show, because
also, like, the more of an expert you are too, the more you realize what you don't know,
and
the value of being able to acquire more information.
And it's one of those things that. Sometimes it drives people nuts when they say, okay, Phil, here's my investment question. And I listen, I may have them qualify something, and then I go, okay, well, it depends. And they're like, I just want a simple answer. I'm like, I can't, I can't do that, because I know there's things involved there, and they might affect my answer depending on how you proceed with this conversation. So there's
talking nuance ruins everything.
The number one show to beat was the complaints I got 3 years ago when I talked about Bitcoin.
Oh,
that was the most.
I can't compare to Bitcoin.
Oh my God! It was the most aggressive, numerous, belligerent emails from some of the smartest fucking people I've ever met. That couldn't see that the emperor had no clothes. It was absolutely fascinating. But I'm sorry, I cut in.
And this is something that means something to me too, because I do struggle with this sometimes, because I'm very conscientious, and the only, like, people say horrible shit to me all the time, like just like repugnant, horrible, garbage shit.
Is it because you're female? Is that?
Oh, it could be any number of reasons. I don't know.
Okay.
I have no idea what motivates people unless they tell me.
Fair enough.
I'm speculating.
Yeah.
I have no idea. Maybe plausibly, but I don't know. That stuff doesn't bother me. All that is to say that stuff doesn't, like, really have an impact on me when people like lay out this, like, really, like, repugnant sort of criticism. Mostly I'm just like, yeah, whatever, because I know on its face I don't have to take it seriously, because it's not coming from a serious space. The criticisms that do impact me the most, and I think that this is why we have these conversations, is it because if you are an empathetic person, if this is impactful to you, when somebody says you're hurting people, that has an impact, like, that hits you emotionally, that hits you, because if it is the case, then you are causing harm. So you need to do a kind of, like, quick assessment to try to figure out whether or not that is the case. And you have a couple of different choices. One of the choices could be that you just kind of disregard it and say, you know what, you're being unfair in the manner in which you're criticizing me. And because you're being unfair in the manner in which you're criticizing me, I don't need to take it seriously. And that just assuages the dissonance at that point, right?
Right.
You can just go, well, I don't need to take this criticism seriously because of the way that you're delivering it to me. Or you can really think about what your internal moral framework is and whether or not what you are saying is harmful, and if you need to educate yourself about that. So that's what I try to do, and it comes at you hard and it comes at you fast. But that's one of the things that I try to do. I try to never get lost in being more concerned about how a message is delivered than what the message is, especially if that message is important and relates to me potentially causing or perpetuating harm.
Fair enough. Now, we know about the Atheist Community of Austin show. Your show, what does that cover specifically?
Oh, I'm all over the place. Like I recently had Alex Malpass on to talk about the Kalam.
Oh, jeez.
I had my friend Katie Montgomery on to talk about trans-exclusionary radical feminism and why we both dislike it so much. And I do a series on J.P. Moreland's book, The Soul. I debunk Christian counselors. I address apologist claims as they pertain to psychology and neuroscience. I have other atheist content creators or activists on just to have general dialogue. So I run a pretty broad spectrum of things that I do. That's not comprehensive.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I'm delighted that my show is just my name, because I can do whatever.
Right.
Like I did a whole episode on bed bugs.
Nice. That was probably very educational. Luckily, I've knock on wood, I've never had any. I don't.
Yeah. It just so happens that I'm actually an expert for reasons I'm not going to go into further than what I said in the show. But I basically had to learn everything about bed bugs and how they work and how they kill. And people are like, whoa, what the fuck was this, man? Because it's not near. But, it's my show. I talk about what I'm interested in. And if you like that, cool. So it's a nice thing to have that variety where you almost never know, but there's some common things that come into play. But, the ability to be flexible, it keeps it entertaining for me as well.
Absolutely. If you don't love it, then you shouldn't do it, right?
Yeah, and I do love it. It's so much better for me than the blog I used to run. I had a blog for 5 years, and I rose to the level of insignificance.
Is it because you just kind of abandoned it for?
No, it's because I sucked. I sucked.
No self-deprecation, not on my watch, Phil. Yourself.
It's so funny. My senior year of high school, for my English class, we had to write a 20-page paper with, at that time, I thought was like the longest thing anyone in humanity would ever write.
Yeah.
And I turned it in, and when the professor was giving back all the papers, they calls out each person and gives them their graded paper, and it's at the very end of class, and he says, I have one more paper here, and that's for Phil Ferguson, and if you would please stay after the bell, we need to talk.
Uh-oh.
And I'm like, oh shit. And so we sit down, and he says, Phil, I don't know how to interpret this paper, because the first half is actually quite well done, but the second half is a complete piece of shit. And I don't know, did you copy half the paper? How did this come to be? I would really like some kind of logical explanation for what I'm seeing, because it could look like I copied somebody. And so I said that my good friend, who actually is no longer a friend because he found out I was an atheist 20 years later after high school. Yeah. He sat down with me for like 3 or 4 hours, and we got through half the paper. And he said, that should be enough for you to take what I've taught you to go through the other half of the paper. And it wasn't. And so I thought I went. Yeah, so I thought I went through the second half and fixed it all. But when I explained that to this English professor, he knew the young gentleman that helped me, and he goes, that makes perfect sense. And he says, you have 24 hours to fix the second half of your paper, or you're going to get a D-. And I was like, okay. So I called my friend. I'm like, you have a couple hours more, please? But yeah, it took forever for me to learn the difference between there and there. And the nice thing is, if I use the wrong there when I'm talking, no one knows.
Great. I share that struggle because I'm dyslexic, so I completely share that struggle.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm dyslexic. It's kind of weird considering I do money, but every once in a while, like 1 out of every 50 times, I will flip 2 numbers in the middle of a number sequence.
Well, that's just calclia. Sorry, I can't pronounce it right now. It's calclia. It's different than dyslexia.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that I always have to double check numbers and calculations and spreadsheets, which one should probably do anyway.
Yes, absolutely. I work in human capital, so yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You should do that.
So when does your book come out?
Never. Absolutely never. My book will, I don't know. I say that now. Maybe one day I'll write a book. You're about the 5th person who's asked me that. Well, I don't know why people think that I should write a book.
Well, it's probably for the same reason people ask me, and it's since high school, I've always thought I would write a book, but I never had an idea what it would be. I now have a really good idea what it would be, but it seems like a lot of work, and I suck as a writer, so I'm scared. I'm terrified. I think that's what it is.
And writing to that degree, I don't know if it would be something that I would enjoy.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is that I would love to have a book, but I don't want to write a book. I mean, I do, you know?
If I could dictate a book and have somebody edit it into some sort of coherent, cogent sort of.
Well, what I'm kind of leaning to is I might employ somebody to help me write the book. Mm-hmm. And I've already talked to this person, so it's a theoretical thing that could happen someday. And he wanted to know if his name would be on the book or if he'd be ghostwriting. Because when you ghostwrite, apparently it's a higher fee because you're not getting any credit, so you want to get more money. And I said that I was morally opposed to ghostwriting. I think that's
it seems like taking credit for something somebody else.
I consider that kind of deceitful. Anyway, anything else we should know about you? How can people contact you? Plug the show again and tell us how you're not related to QAnon.
I am not, in no way related to QAnon. They actually don't like me very much.
I can imagine.
To be honest with you. So you can find me on Twitter. It's Shan_Q0, but I wouldn't suggest following me there because it's just a dystopian wasteland. On Facebook, I'm Shannon Q_tube. But I think I capped out at friends on Facebook. I think you cap out at 5,000. But you can follow me there still, I think. And then there's the channel, Shannon Q, just called Shannon Q. Everything I do is very creative, obviously.
Like me, you're a naming savant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my name is literally Shannon, so there you go. And yeah, I've got a Discord. Most of it, like if you go to my YouTube channel and click on any video, there's just a pile of links in the description that you can peruse should you like, or if you follow me on Twitter, I have a link tree in my Twitter bio that you can go. So if what I said was in any way interesting to you at all and you'd like to see what else I do elsewhere, there's all kinds of different ways to consume media that I create. It's all over the place.
Fair enough. I did want to ask, I forgot this earlier when we were talking about books, if someone wanted to just kind of start, they've not had, maybe they had biology in junior high or high school, and that's really kind of all they know about biology, anatomy, the brain, whatever. What would be a good starter book? Do you have anything in mind?
Everyone I talk to, I suggest Brain Bugs. Brain Bugs is one of the best books if you're interested in cognition and perception and memory and just kind of how the brain functions in general, with really decent, like just overall, like a high level overall conceptual understanding of how the brain operates. The Brain Bugs is a really good book.
I like it. So when I'm done with my next book on trees, I might have to get Brain Bugs, because I'm doing a series of books about trees, just trying to, it's something I came across. I'm like, I don't know that much about trees, so I'm learning all about trees.
Oh, mad respect for the interest in just consuming things so that you can learn more about the world in general.
It's a funky thing because I signed up for Audible. Yeah, Audible.
I love Audible.
Audiobooks. I pay people to read to me.
Yeah, me too.
But I got the platinum subscription where I get 24 tokens, so I get basically 24 books read to me for a ridiculous like $140.
Oh, wow.
And I try to get each month one fiction and one nonfiction. And I try to consume them within the month, because then I have to do it again next time. And one of the objectives is to regularly, frequently get something that I don't know anything about, for the very purpose that I don't know anything about it. That's why I get a book.
Cool. Very cool. See, I very rarely get fiction books, but I love Audible. But I listen to it in the background while I work. I have the type of brain that can't just focus on an individual task in silence, so I usually need to have something on to distract me, either YouTube or an audiobook. At all times, I need to have something on in the background, so I listen to a lot of books on Audible.
You're going to love this, and my apologies, listeners, for Shannon's my therapy for tonight. When I was in college, I would read textbooks for a variety of classes, and I would often have on not only current top 40 music or dance music, club music that I like, but I would also have on CNN. And so people would come into my room and they're like, "What are you doing?" "I'm studying." "With the radio on? With the TV on? Both of them on?" I'm like, "Yeah," because I went down to one of the really quiet places down in the basement of the dormitory, where they have these little seating areas that have walls around you, and they are actually quasi-anechoic chambers where the sounds don't bounce and they don't come back to you. So it's like totally silent.
Yeah, that's what happens. That's one of the reasons that I need to do it too. I think you and I may be similar in that regard, is that my brain is constantly going.
Yeah.
Like, not necessarily on the thing that I'm focused on, but on a pile of things simultaneously. And one of the ways to prevent that, and so that I can hone in and focus on any one thing, is to have all kinds of external perceptual stimulus simultaneously, so that my brain, like other parts of my brain, are essentially focused on the dull background stimulus, which distracts that component of my brain, for lack of a better term. So that I can dedicate my focus to what it is that I intend to be attentive to.
I get that, man, because that's what I had. I learned that if I tried to study in silence, there's nothing. Although on the other hand, one of my favorite things to do, which is, just so random, mowing the lawn.
Oh, I love mowing. I like that too.
Yeah, it's because of the loudness of the mower and the simplicity of the task. When I'm mowing the lawn, there is nothing else. It kind of all stops, and all I know is that I'm mowing the lawn, and that's kind of nice.
Do you ever read a book and read an entire chapter and realize at the end of the page that you didn't retain a single thing that you just read? You just literally went through the motions. Your brain was actually reading, but you can't recall anything that you just read.
I've done that, and it's funny because I'm an okay reader. I'm not anywhere near as fast as maybe I could be, but I can do okay. But the beautiful thing about an audiobook is I can walk and listen. I can do yard work and listen. I can drive the car and listen. And so I feel like I'm doing two things at once, which gives me a weird satisfaction that maybe it shouldn't, but it does.
I think you and I may be very similar, Phil.
All right. Well, while we're playing this game,
okay.
When you're going to do something, let's say you're going to take a little break from the work, and you're going to your pantry to, I assume you have pantries, and you're going to get something to eat.
Okay.
Is there a monologue that goes on in your brain that walks you through that process right before or during or a minute before you're doing it that kind of helps you figure out what you're going to do?
No, I tend to, before I even get up, have a plan in my head, and my brain is going 3,000 miles a minute on the next thing I'm going to do, or a project that I'm working on, or a book that I'm going to read, or someone I'm going to call, or organizing.
But does it feel like a voice though?
Do I have an internal monologue? Yes, absolutely. I definitely have an internal voice. Absolutely have an internal monologue, 100%.
Okay, because I've run into very few people. I do not.
Interesting. So you don't have an actual internal monologue.
Either my understanding of it is wrong, or it just doesn't exist. I don't have that small voice or an auditory kind of thing, because I'm a huge auditory learner, so you'd think that maybe I would, but I don't have any of that at all. And I've talked to so many people, and I thought maybe you'd have that weirdness too, but just me.
No, I totally have. I definitely have an internal monologue. Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, Shannon Q, we took up more time than we were supposed to from your day. I thank you for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. And maybe, just like all of my listeners, I keep telling them someday we'll be able to interact with other humans and have an attendance at a conference where we can say hello to all of our dear friends. And I look forward to, because I don't think we've ever met in person.
No, I don't think that we have. I don't think you were at the ACA when I was there at all. Because I don't even know if you were in Texas, but I don't think that you were there when I was there for the Faithless Forum conference. And that's the time I was around.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was actually really close to that weekend, but it was a different weekend because I'm near Chicago.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
But I do get the Austin confusion because sometimes I'm down there once or twice a year, and I've been on Atheist Experience and many other shows. And great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for being here and getting this far in the show. Greatly appreciate it. If you want to help me out a little bit, a couple things you can do. One, you can share the show with a friend so there's more people listening to the show. That would be freaking awesome. You could go to Stitcher or Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you in advance. Or you can do like what more and more people are doing, which is very cool. Go to patreon.com/Phil and look for the Phil Ferguson Show, and you can contribute. You can become a patron of the arts, a patron of the podcasts, and throw in a couple of dollars just as a sign that you're getting some value out of the show. You appreciate the effort, and you get some information that helps you in some way. So taking $1 a show, again, in the last couple of weeks, had quite a few new people sign up, so thank you. Thank you very much for that. The top tier is $6.66, and of course, as a quick reminder, that does not give you, you're not a client, so it doesn't create an advisor-client relationship. That's the phrase that I'm looking for, but it is appreciated by me very much so. So if you're thinking about that, thank you for even pondering it, and if you go ahead and do it, that'd be fantastic. Also, fun stuff, and part of the reason I'm having a little more difficulty getting the shows out faster, we're in the middle of a kitchen remodel, and so it consumes some of my time. I'm not actually doing the work. I don't do those things, not because they're beneath me, because I suck. I would destroy things. So it's better for me to pay a professional to do that job, just like I would pay somebody else to make a t-shirt for me. I don't have the right equipment. I don't want to spend the time and effort, so I buy a t-shirt. Same thing with investments. Same thing with changing the oil in your car. If you like doing that kind of thing, that's cool. But we've gone all the way down to the subfloor in the kitchen, and then they had to put in subfloor laminate. Oh my God, I don't remember the right words. But they put some special magical board and glued it down onto the subfloor boards, and now we have tiles. In a few days, we're going to have grout between the beautiful tiles, and then we're going to get all the new cabinets, the countertops, it's all this, and it takes time and effort. And sometimes when I'm in the mood to record, they're banging, adding something or removing something, so I can't record during those times. And then, of course, the other weird thing is my office is on the south end of my house, and it sticks out kind of like as an added-on room. I know it's properly incorporated into the house. It's not weird, but the thing that I get is I get full sun in the morning, I get full sun midday, and I get full sun until the sun ducks behind a big, autumn blaze maple in our backyard. So my office gets a lot of sun, and sometimes I have to have fans on to keep it cool. And matter of fact, I just turned them all off to talk to you, and it's starting to get pretty fucking toasty in here. So we're going to wrap that up. I do appreciate you listening to the show. If you have any show ideas, any topics you want me to go over or re-go over, something that you've never heard me talk about, something that you're reminded that I talked about, 5-6 years ago. It's amazing. Been doing this that long. And you want it to get a refresher or an update, let me know. If you have ideas for who should be a guest on the show, you can send me information on that. Keep in mind, if it's someone really famous, like you say, Phil, I think you should interview Johnny Depp. Well, no shit, I should interview Johnny Depp, but that's not very helpful unless you have a contact. unless you have some way to actually actualize that. But if you've read a book on investing or about secularism or what bullshit Christianity is, if I've not had that author on, I can probably get a hold of them and interview them to have something on for the show. I've got a few interview requests out for some people who have written about trees. I'm on a little tree kick, and I'm reading books about trees. Maybe I can get one of them on, but so far it's not gone well. They just don't answer. People are busy. So that wraps up the show. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And until the next show, stay safe out there, and hopefully I can meet you somewhere in person before the year is out at some kind of conference. Until then, ciao.